Hey everybody, first of all, thank you so very much for joining us this afternoon. I am Ben Waterman. I'm in charge of business development for Monoflow International. We are very excited to be here. A moment of personal privilege. I'd like to really especially thank the RPA, the Reusable Packaging Association, for their continued leadership towards education, educating the marketplace, and educating our industry. So thank you, RPA, for that. One of the things I wanted to do is begin with a quick background of Monoflow International has been in business for over 50 years. We are the manufacturer of plastic reusable transport packaging. And as such, we touch a tremendous number of customers on a daily basis. We're involved in multiple series of industries, including aerospace, automotive OEM, appliance, downstream retail grocery distribution, and in particular, e-commerce and order fulfillment. And that's what we're going to be focusing in on today, is talking about the actual containers and trays and totes and pallets that populate these automated storage and retrieval systems that are designed for e-commerce and order fulfillment. Now, we've got 50 years of experience making plastic. We've got over 25 years of experience in this automation segment. So I think with the hundreds of thousands, tens of millions of these containers and trays that we've manufactured, I hope you know that we know what we're talking about and hope we can demonstrate that. So helping me out today is none other than Andrew Rader, who happens to be our automation sales manager for that group, and Mr. Denny Williams, who happens to be our food and automation director for those segments. So gentlemen, thanks so very much for joining me up here today. And let's talk about what is our favorite thing: reusable containers for e-commerce and order fulfillment. Now, I'm going to tell you guys a little secret. If you haven't thought about the reusables in your systems yet, that's okay. That's why we're here, because guess what? Oftentimes, this is one of the pieces that is not thought about maybe until the last minute. So, Denny, when folks talk to us, when we talk to them, when is it that we're actually getting involved in some of these projects?
Well, unfortunately, in today's world, the scope is at the back end. And it's something that really kind of bothers us a little bit, because when it's an afterthought or the back end side of the discussion, oftentimes you leave little room for any critical design implementations that can have an impact on the schedule.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think we found that we have an ideal time for folks to get involved with us. And when is that time that allows for a project to be successful?
Well, oftentimes it comes down to, whenever you're ready to start talking, right? These systems are multi-million-dollar systems for a lot of people. So there's a lot of moving pieces. Oftentimes, you've got senior leadership, executive group, boards that are making decisions, and that decision has to start working its way down before it probably starts to get down to our level. But in reality, we want to start talking to you as soon as you're ready to start talking. And for us, the process needs to be earlier rather than later. And there's a real important part of that. If you try to treat it like a commodity item and leave it all the way to the back side of it, oftentimes that lack of insight to that can lead to some downsides when it comes to the final solution and what do we need to provide for you in a design engineering phase that gets you your solution.
Okay, so I'm hearing the best time is the sooner the better.
Sooner the better.
Okay, and I think we saw that. We talked to quite a number of folks, and we see that oftentimes, and we had a real neat call earlier this summer where the gentleman on the other end of the line on the presentation was saying, you know what, guys, I had no idea there were this many considerations and decisions that had to be made in working with these containers and trays. And so in terms of who drives the selection process then, Andrew, who is doing this? Is it the end user? Is it the system integrator? Who actually makes the call on what container and tray to use?
Well, the easy answer is all of the above, right? So depending on where you are in the process, let's say you've selected the integrator, typically they'll be the ones driving the specifications, the schedules, everything you need to make the correct selection. But we've had times where end users will come to us directly, and it's almost kind of like a trial basis where they don't really know where they want to go. We worked with a bunch of different integrators in the space. They're trying to understand what fits their needs, whether they're SKUs, their products, what have you. And so like Denny's mentioning, the sooner the better. But I would also say it helps us if you guys do know what direction you want to go into. There's different types of systems. I won't get into those details here for this talk, but depending on your company, there's going to be different throughputs. There's different load capacities, different requirements that you'll need to think about. And I think it's important to have that good relationship with your integrator, right? Because at the end of the day, we're here to support them. We're just the bin that goes, or the tray that goes into that system. They're designing the entire system, right? So, we're a support system. While we've worked with all of these people, it's important to work with your integrator directly. I think it's the more people that understand from the end user, the company's perspective, the more people that are involved, the more successful the project will be, right? If you have, your procurement talking to your engineers, talking to your executive team, you guys are all on the same page. That makes the project schedules, the implementation, everything go as smooth as possible. So, I think the more the better. Making sure that there's no bad questions, there's no bad timing. It's just a lot of this is still new in North America. I know it's primarily develops in Europe with some of these integrators and comes over to North America. So, as this market continues to develop, we're here to support with any questions that may come up.
Excellent. And you had mentioned being on the same page. So let's get on the same page, because as an industry, we're a little confusing. We talk about bins, totes, and containers, and trays and pallets. So real quick, what are the three, Andrew? Like a bin, a tote, and a container?
Yeah.
What are we talking about?
Again, they're all synonymous, right? So a container, a tote, a bin would all be in that same product category, let's say. Depending on the system, different integrators or different folks like to refer it to a different name. So it tends to get a little bit confusing, but as long as you kind of understand that there's a container, tote, bin, and then there's the tray. So there's two different applications. The container, right, where you're having, let's say more loose SKUs or different, you can divide it into different compartments, where the tray is kind of like those case lots in the shrink wrap, the packaging, that'll sit right on the tray and it'll be swept off if it's a system like that, or it'll be lifted up and brushed off. So there's different applications, and I think everybody has their own twist to it. As long as you kind of, keep it all straight. I know it can get confusing whether you're talking to, someone based in North America, someone based in Europe, someone based in Asia. Everybody kind of has their unique spin to it. But at the end of the day, it's again, going back to your integrator and understanding, the product specifications and the requirements.
So now that we've cleared up container, tray, and bin are synonymous, let's get really confusing now, guys. Let's talk about the footprint sizing. Okay, we're in North America, but what's the unit of measure that we're using?
So it is metric system, which I know here gets a little bit tricky, where a lot of times people will come to us talking in inches, and while we can do that, that's not a problem. It's all these systems are designed around millimeters. So typically it'll be like a 600 by 400, which you see here, or a 650 by 450 is another popular industry standard. So that's, we got to kind of switch our brains to think in the metric system, which is, we can figure it out. It's fine. It's just like kind of getting you used to that system, where that's not how our brains are typically wired. But, those are the two main ones. I will say the heights can vary depending on your SKUs, like I talked about, or your product offerings. We can go up, 120 up to 450, anywhere in between there. So, I wouldn't say you're limited to one or two different options. There's a wide variety of footprints and heights that we could offer.
Okay, wonderful. And then if we keep kind of going through that selection process from the container or tray or bin or tote or tray, right, pallet, we're rolling through the system, and we start talking about material. And this is kind of interesting because we've always in North America been talking about HDPE, right? That's what all of our downstream distribution totes are. But Denny, what is our most popular material that we're using for automation containers and trays?
Yeah, in this industry, it's really polypropylene, and there's reasons for that. The molecular structure of polypropylene limits its deflection under load. So as engineers and designers of these systems, understanding what your load is and understanding what the deflection criteria is from the integrator and whatever type of ASRS system or automated storage and retrieval system you've selected, we have to design the tote to meet that deflection requirement and not exceed that. Because once we exceed that, they can't get that container or that tray back out of the system, and that's a no-go, right? That's a catastrophe in the system. It means you have to shut the system down, get in there, climb up the crane, and go drag out that container. So polypropylene allows you to design to a specific load limit, and then it stops deflecting at that designed load limit. If you overload it, then it's going to continue to deflect a little farther. So understanding what your limits are, what your max loads are, important to the design criteria. And polypropylene, again, is probably, I'd say, 99% the material used. The second material that's used, and it still has a polypropylene base to it, is polypropylene with electrostatic dispative material in it. It's an additive. And if you've got sensitive electronic components, then you need PPESD, that's the acronym for that, to help protect that, whether it's conductive or dispative.
Okay, wonderful.
Last material you already spoke on was high density polyethylene. And while that's the primary resin of use for downstream distribution, has been for the last 75 years, it still has this application in automated storage and retrieval, primarily when you get into cold chain. And that's really cold chain, minus 10 to minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit, where specifically you're concerned about chafing in the ASRS system. On the shelf, you don't want that chafing falling down into the other trays below it, and so we use that particular material. And or if the container is going to come out of the captive system and be used for downstream distribution, that's the best material for those two applications.
Okay. And so we're going to tee ourselves up for success by selecting a proper size for our system, the footprint, the wall height, the material. And then how do we ensure like the ability to convey this product effectively? Like, are there some options on the bottom that might help us be successful in that?
Absolutely, yeah. So we have a couple of our containers up here. Both are 600, 400 footprint. One is what we call the hybrid base, and the other is the welded base. The one here on the right is hybrid, my right, your left. You can see on the inside there's a rib structure to it. Andrew, if you want to flip it around, you'll see on the bottom there's another rib structure that's concave that would never engage the conveyor system. So what that allows us to do is to load to that max limit. This hybrid container is an engineered solution. It's not a commodity. That's the difference in a milk case and an automated storage and retrieval container. It's highly engineered for specific application. So this container here is actually load rated for 35 kilograms and a max deflection of 3 millimeters. The critical part of this is also coupling with polypropylene material for high-speed conveyance in these large shuttle type delivery systems where you need to keep that container going straight and or in lane diversions where it doesn't spin around. So polypropylene gives you that coefficient of friction that you need, and the base design as it is has a certain level of flatness, and that tolerance is critical to the integrator in order to keep it from spinning like a top. So again, that bottom is important. Andrew, if you'll take the other container is our welded base, and you can see it's smooth on the inside, it's smooth on the outside, and it's a two-piece construction. So what this container allows you to do, again, it's the same concept. We've got a recessed area in the center that allows for deflection. This container is rated at 50 kilograms. So you can put up to 50 kg in that, and it won't deflect more than 3 millimeters to still give you the same performance that the integrator demands.
So I've had the opportunity to be in several different systems, and I'm just remembering old school systems. I just remember the noise. Things were incredibly loud. And then recently, being in newer systems, they're a lot quieter. The environment's a lot more pleasant to be in. Now, what can I attribute that level of lack of noise to?
Polypropylene material, absolutely. Polypropylene has the lowest decibel rating if you compare it to high-density polyethylene. If you've ever been in any of these high-speed systems, whether you're in a Coke facility, or if you're in a bakery facility, or if you're in a downstream distribution center like going for Walgreens or CVS, and you listen to the high-density polyethylene running up and down the high-speed conveyance, there's a lot of noise. If we switch that out to polypropylene, we lower that noise by about 3 times. So it's a considerable amount of impact.
Okay. One of the things that I've noticed in all of the projects that we've done, and then you do your obligatory Google search, I'm kind of seeing a lack of color options versus the rest of the reusable packaging industry. We see a lot of different fun colors in different businesses there. Why is color selection important, or the lack of color selection important?
Well, not all colors are equal, right? At the end of the day. When you're into these systems where you've got a lot of scanners, when you've got 1 million totes in the system, and maybe your system you're looking at isn't going to be 1 million totes, maybe it's going to be 100,000 totes. Any one of these systems where you've got shuttles running around a conveyance, you've got scanners. These scanners cost money. in these systems, and that equates to cost. So the color you select has an impact on the readability of the container. What's typical in the industry is a light gray color, a RAL 7035, fairly light, but really any color is possible. What we're tending to see now in the marketplace, especially with large corporate brands, they want to stripe the facility because when you walk into them, you see a sea of containers up in the rack or in the shelf, and so they want to include their corporate colors. That's possible. If that's really what you want and need, you can, but it may have an impact to the scanner. And also, though, colors do have an impact to moldability. These containers, as I've said, are engineered solutions. So bottom flatness, tolerance, sidewall flatness, tolerance, in-bow, out-bow are critical, and colors can have an impact of that. There are things that we can do as experts in this marketplace to control that. So as you're selecting that, and why it's so important to engage us early on and not to the backside, so we can help you in that decision-making process. If you want to use a unique color that may have an impact to the tolerances, we can walk you through that and the potential cost implications if you want to proceed down that path.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. I think what fascinates me most about an industry that, while it seems that it's brand new, but we've been involved with it for the last 2.5 decades or more, is this continued innovation though. I mean, this industry continues to move almost at a lightning speed. And so, Andrew, from an innovation side of things, what kind of new fun things are you seeing on the horizon or just recently introduced even?
So I'll take you back to a perfect example that we're here at Pack Expo. A couple years ago at Modex in Atlanta back in 2023, I had an end user come up to the booth and, high-level executive, big decision maker, stop by and said, hey, I have this product. We have a current system. It's a legacy system. It's not effective. It's not efficient. What can we do to improve that throughput, improve the performance? How can you guys help us? And so, I think that gives a good example of, you look at the stuff that we have here, stuff in the booth, it's not always going to be perfect for everybody, right? And so the fact that, people can come to us, and we'll touch on this in a little bit, we have our own in-house engineering team that can design new products, new solutions. And it was really cool to kind of go through the whole process with them where it's, here's an idea, here's a need. And we work with them hand in hand for over 3 years from start to finish. And now we delivered those totes about a couple months ago. So that's a perfect example of, here's what we need, help us out. And 3 years later, we have a brand new facility for this end user that's been a great success. And so I just like how, we're not going to hold you to certain restrictions, right? I think it gives you guys that flexibility. There's not so much pressure to be like, I got to make it work in this little window right here. There's a lot of options and a lot of, like you're saying, innovation where there's new systems, new applications that we're willing to work with pretty much anybody that comes to us. So it was a great story, and just fitting that we're at a trade show, that it was a start to finish from a trade show, and here we are. So
absolutely wonderful. That's great. And I love, again, that we're in a segment of this industry that is constantly changing and evolving. And if you see something off the shelf, that's wonderful. But again, we're in such a state where this innovation and this constant evolution of the product is possible, and folks are willing to put money behind it and to come up with the right solution, not just a solution or a fix maybe, but the real application solution. So that's always exciting. I want to shift gears just a little bit here. You guys had mentioned talking about some of the tolerances that we're working with here and the need for exacting tolerances. Monoflow International, we're incredibly grateful. We've worked so hard to become and get certified. We've got our ISO 9001 2015 certification. And from a process standpoint, when we're manufacturing the container or tote, it's so imperative, any manufacturer, that the first tote off the line is the same as the millionth tote off the line, okay? You guys don't have the luxury of having totes that vary dramatically in spec as you're building out a system that might be 10,000, 200,000, or 1 million units, right? So we've got this process internally for quality. And what are some other things that we do internally and that, whatever a person you may decide to make your containers or trays or bins, what's something that's important for them to consider, or the relationships they need to have to ensure a quality product for your system?
Well, I think it comes back to you need to choose a partner, a container partner, a tray partner, a pallet partner, for that matter, that has experience, that understands the needs of these systems, That's going to save you critical time and redesign and or potentially the impact of your schedule rollout. So you certainly want to go with someone that's been down the road, if you will, has had, been in the saddle and have done and proven themselves. So for monoflow, it really starts at the front end with design and mold engineers. Once we understand what your application is or need, if it's unique outside of our standard, working with your team, your engineers to develop that, whether it may be an insert or a specific need or a specific footprint, knowing the requirements. So having that done and then building the mold, multi-million shot, high-speed mold that produces the same part shot after shot, time after time, to the exacting tolerances and standards, so that you know if you get 1 million totes in your system, tote number 1 and tote number 1 million goes in unabated without issues and problems.
Okay, absolutely critical. And let's talk for a second about actually placing that tote tray bin into the system. So what we call that induction. Andrew, who does the induction? Who's responsible for putting these things in the systems?
Yeah, I mean, it's a case-by-case basis, right? There's, depending on your company structure, how many employees you have, a lot of end users will take that upon themselves to do that service where, we'll ship it to you, and then it's kind of, you guys take it from there and induct it into the system. And, we found that to be, I guess from a cost perspective, yes, you're saving money, but it is a lot of time and you have to have that labor force and resources available to do that. So something that we could offer is we can do the induction ourselves. So we manufacture the tote, we ship it to your facility, and we'll have on-site resources to put it in the system for you. So it's really that turnkey service, start from finish, where you kind of take out the middleman, you don't have to worry about it. Integrator's happy because they don't have to do it, and user's happy they don't have to do it. And so we just take it from start to finish and kind of close the loop for the entire project.
Oftentimes I think when we look into this, the end user is often tasked by the integrator to induct the tote into the system. And if this is a greenfield or a new system for them, induction is not for the faint of heart, and it's a job when you stop and think about putting 100,000 totes or 1 million totes into the system that they really don't want to do or don't have the time to do. It's one of those nagging problems. How are we going to do it? We don't know how to do this. And then they've got to be trained either by an integrator or somebody like us who does integration or induction services, which is a service that we can offer to help get those totes in. So I kind of like the term production to induction, which is turnkey and takes that level of stress off the end user.
And I think there's probably a benefit in combining those two roles into one, the production to induction, because every project does not go without issue. So we continually see project delays. And so if you happen to select somebody that's not only the producer, but also the inductor, they can adjust accordingly the production schedule, the shipment schedule to meet with these peaks and valleys that we sometimes see here. So that's always neat to be able to do that. Is there anything else I think that we need to take a look at when we're selecting a possible bin supplier or the actual bin tote tray itself? Is there anything else that we can think of? I'm almost thinking like a familiarity or an ability to work well with the company, just work well with your supplier. Is that something that's important?
Yeah, I mean, I think the million-dollar question is always comes back to price. What does it cost? How do I budget that effectively? And going back to kind of how we started here, where the earlier you get into that process and understand, because not many end users or companies out there have ever had to purchase this kind of product, right? So there's not that background knowledge or that familiarity with what the expectation should be, right? And so I think the earlier you can kind of budget and get your minds around, here's this part of the investment. I know the big system is the big investment, right? The $1 million investment, but there is, we are a part of it. It is a percentage. It's not going to be a huge number, but it's just knowing what that should be, right? Because going back to if that's not properly managed at the beginning, we're kind of scrambling at the end. We don't have the schedule. We don't have the budget, right? So I think it's just important to be as open. You have that communication at the beginning so that everybody has the correct expectations. And at the end of the day, we just want the project to go smoothly without any hiccups or delays. And that's what we're here to support.
These systems are oftentimes, as I said earlier, can be several $100,000 to several $100 million. So they're large scale investments. Irregardless of your size, it's still relative to your revenue stream, the amount of investment that you're making there. So, choosing someone that understands start to finish is a very important process. Often overlooked, the container is a component of it, but without the container, probably 2/3 of the system won't even function. So that's an important part you need to grasp. So having us involved earlier on in the discussion process is probably pretty important to have a successful program at the end.
Absolutely. Wonderfully stated, guys. Wonderfully stated. So just to kind of summarize, we've got a lot of decisions to make as we're looking at systems from sizing to colors to actual container, tray, bin, selection. And at the end of the day, it's so important to know that you definitely are not alone in this journey. And that was probably the most refreshing thing to be able to share out this summer with this one particular prospect, in that it's like, hey buddy, we understand what you're going through. You're not alone. There's other Fortune 500 firms doing the exact same thing. And so with that said, if you in particular have any questions, comments, feel free to swing by booth 35008. We're here all week. And I also am $13.42 up on my Vegas winnings. So we're going to try to make that a little bit bigger this evening. So thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. And if you have any questions, 35008. Take care, have a wonderful day, and safe travels back home, y'all.